What's up, YouTube? If you know, I've been trying to get through these backlog of like testing videos for Shadow of Mortality. So this is another one of those videos, kind of showing off a little bit of the gameplay, the considerations I'm looking at, how it plays out as I'm trying to decide if this is a card I want to keep in Dimir Shadow. If you've seen any of the Dimir lists recently, you know this is basically what I've been on for a couple weeks now, plus or minus like a couple cards here and there, but nothing drastically changed. Which I'll have a link down below to the updated list, whatever I'm running in a league right this second. Otherwise, have a link to the Twitch channel below if you want to catch a live stream when we do. The Twitter page, it's the first place to go live, or first place that gets updated whenever a stream goes live, as well as the Discord link down below. And as always, if you're enjoying the commentary, enjoying the content, feel free to drop a YouTube sub. Doesn't cost you anything, just lets you know whenever new videos go live. So let's just go ahead and hop in. I'm trying to make these like backlog videos pretty quick because they're not really a change in list. Not really a lot of interesting card choices to talk about. I'll have bigger breakdowns when it comes to testing out like new stuff from the Lord of the Rings sets. But for a lot of these back play videos, like just trying to kind of showcase what I'm looking at when I'm evaluating a new card. In this case, Shadow of Mortality. So up against Burn round one, we'd have a good hand if we weren't against specifically Burn with like this double dismember, double consider counterspell. But obviously being against Burn specifically, it does make things a little more awkward. Now these dismembers look a lot rough, a lot rougher. I really want to find third land. We do not. We could just pass and like dismember the Goblin Guide, but I don't think we're winning if we do that. I think we need to keep like developing our board plan. Sideboarding against Burn, like Street Wraiths are coming out aggressively, usually trimming some Thought Seizes, bringing in like Flusterstorm, Turok, Path of Peril, and EE. Really good answers to like Sanctifier on Vec. Play out this EE just because I don't have an answer to a 1-drop right now. So if I play out EE on turn 2 for 1, then I'm not cracking it till turn 3. So if they just have like double 1-drop, I'm taking a lot of unnecessary damage. But here I'm just trade EE 1 for 1. It's fine. I'm not doing anything else. So it really looks like my opponent is adapting that kind of build up a hand and then just like flurry off burn spells mentality, which is fine. But I really like bringing in Turok in these situations because Turok kind of like disrupts that very heavily. Because now it turns into, oh, you've got a bunch of cards in hand. You can't fire them all off at once. Well, here's a Turok that might get like 2 of them out of hand, especially if you're clogged up on like 2-mana spells. So, with the opponent giving us something we can interact with on their turn, as well as tapping down a little bit on mana, we're kind of setting ourselves up to kick this Turok. And if they end up spending a like burn spell on the Turok itself, then yeah, we ended up just getting like 4 burn spells out of hand right there. The Skullcrack, Spike, Searing Blaze, Lightning Bolt. Obviously, we took a lot of damage, but we get to follow it up with a threat, a bunch of counter magic. So good on us for using our double 1-mana counters instead of using the counter spell, which usually you want to use your more restrictive counters sooner. So I want to fire off like the Stubborn Denial and the Flusterstorm when I can and save the counter spell for something that maybe one of those others couldn't answer. But yeah, they're flashing the Borrower just to make it a 1-turn clock. We're only flashing in the Borrower because we have the mana to hold up Counterspell as well, so pretty protected. Here we were keeping a 1-lander, but we had the double consider. We had the Death Shadow, So like there's a reasonable chance we were gonna find a second land at some point, and our opponent's likely to do some damage to us, get us to um where like this shadow would be live. Now we just want to find a third land to be able to Path of Peril. All right. I always love when my opponent does this when I'm at like 13 life and they don't attack, because I think a lot of people playing against Burn get this idea of, oh, shadow players not at below 13 life, I don't need to attack because I'm just going to turn on Death Shadow. It's like, yeah, I get the thought, but at the same time, most of our deck is built around lowering our life total. So you're not really hurting me. You're just giving me more time to lose life at my controlled pace. Also, if you notice there, the block on the Sanctifier on Vec got a Deflecting Palm. Deflecting Palm specifies that it only stops damage done to you. It does not stop damage done to creatures. So blocking with the mURktide meant that I got the Deflecting Palm out of hand for free, essentially, which I'm making that block 100% of the time, even if I know about Deflecting Palm. Because ultimately, if my opponent spends like 2 more burn spells killing off my mURktide, I'm thrilled with that. All right, here I would rather hold up Counterspell than go for the Thoughtseize. And I have the ability next turn to cast the Thoughtseize and still hold up the Counterspell. So I don't want to like take away my options. I didn't know what my opponent was on. I go ahead and counterspell this grief because I've got Drown in the Lock still, but I'm kind of protecting this Thoughtseize. So if I Thoughtseize and my opponent's just got like a dead hand, just nothing good going on, I might just play the mURktide like so. Like, hey, yeah, you could top deck a Living End or a Cascade spell this turn. I'm gonna bank on you not doing that, and then I'm just gonna get to untap with a mURktide, hit in the face, feel happy about life. Get to play out this Shadow of Mortality, give you 1 more draw step while I got drowned. So you'd have to find Cascade spell plus a way to protect the Cascade spell, which that did not happen. So we get to go to game 2. Sideboarding against Living End, hand or removal spells coming out, anything that says counter coming in, unlicensed hearse coming in, um, Flusterstorm, Chalice of the Void, all those. So opponent's on a bit of a mull. They do have a Force of Negation and an Architect's of Will, but they're also missing a third land. So if they end up cycling that Architect's of Will to look for a land, they lose the blue card for Force. Or they have a Waker of Waves. Pretty okay. All right. So now that they are not hitting their land drop, I really want to try to aggressively get down that mURktide here. So I'm kind of okay binning just about whatever I find. Obviously, finding the shadow means I can play that out instead. So finding like a replacement threat is fine. Go for the Force on the Chalice. I'm just going to go ahead and counterspell the Force because they're not going to resolve a Living End while the Force is out. So if they spend their turn like evoking a Foundation Breaker to deal with the Force, then I just get to go to my turn, untap my mana, have my counterspells back up. So that's completely fine. If they pass to my turn and decide to Force of Negation, then that's the 2 cards out of hand. I still have Shadow. They're still missing a third land drop. Still don't have a Cascade spell. So all pretty good on our end if that plays out that way. So round 3 is another Living End opponent. They're gonna go for the grief. I'm just gonna fire off this Consider because for the most part, it doesn't matter. Like if Consider finds a counter spell, then that's pretty good. But they're gonna take the Consider. Like the rest of my hand is just terrible. So if they have the option to take it, they'll take the consider. They might as well trade it in for something else. So if you haven't seen this generous int card, this is like one of the new pieces from the Lord of the Rings set. So you'll see it popping up a little bit here. It just lets you cycle for a forest. So they're able to play like a lot fewer lands. All right, so they go for the living in. I'm just going to dress down to try to stop this grief so I can like follow up with a shadow. But they have the force of negation, so scoop it up there. On to game two. Okay hand. Like we've got the thought seizes, which are nice, but obviously we need to find lands, but that's where consider kind of comes in. One of the really good things for us about these new cyclers, like the int, they have one that swamp cycles, is those don't actually progress the game plan of finding more cascade spells. So they're like a little more consistent with the mana, able to fight through Blood Moon a little bit better. But they're not more consistent at finding cascade spells, which is great for us as a counterspell deck. Like, we don't care about you playing through Blood Moon. We don't really care about you hitting land drops. We care about you being able to sculpt your hand with force and negations, counter spells. All right. I decided to go for the consider there because if I do miss the land, I can still thought seize. And I know I'm kind of playing a little bit loose this match, like giving my opponent opportunities to hit a cascade spell. Uh, but I really need like a lot of stuff to go my way. I need to build up my hand with the additional lands, with getting down the shadow of mortality. So I'm pretty okay, like taking a turn or 2 turns shields down. So here, kind of what I was talking about, they've got the int. Well, the int doesn't draw them closer to a living in. It just kind of like takes a dead draw out of their deck with one of their lands. So we're okay with that. And now we're just never going to tap off Counterspell and Stubborn Denial. If opponent does find like another copy of Otawara, then that's a little unfortunate, but we can just follow up with like hard casting a Shadow of Mortality and hold up Stub. So not the end of the world. And that brings us to match number 4. Yeah, these quicker videos for like the backlog stuff, I think is going to be pretty nice because we are able to just, like I said, rapid fire through a bunch of these leagues. Got Leyline of Sanctity, which does shut down Thought Seize. But at the end of the day, if my opponent wants to like fight over my Thought Seize but doesn't actually do anything to kill me, then that's kind of okay. Like some people out there might think we're in a rough spot right here, not seeing lands. But I think we're fine. We've got Flusterstorm, Stub, Drown in the Lock. Opponent's not casting Cascade spells. Um, it depends on your mana situation, but usually if your opponent casts a Cascade spell on your turn, you really want to think about Flusterstorming it. So you just win the fight over Force Negation. That way, if they untap and go for a Cascade spell on their turn, then cards like Stubborn Denial, Drown in the Lock, Counterspell can counter that Cascade spell without having to worry about Force. But I know a lot of times people want to like save the Flusterstorm to be like the last counter spell to use, like the, oh, I'm definitely going to get you with this one. But I think it can be really strong to just proactively use it. So just sitting on drown and stub. I really don't want to fire off. That's another one of the cyclers, the Oliphant. It's a mountain cycler. Really good for what's it called? Violent outburst. But yeah, I just really don't want to tap off of double counterspell here, so I'm pretty fine just playing a little more passively. Oh yeah, this is a fun line. I get to Thoughtseize myself to lose the 2 life, to drown and lock the Shardless Agent and present lethal right there. And since they only have 1 card in hand, I know I'm not about to get like forced or something. So up against mURktide, blue-red mURktide. I have been trying to get myself in a mindset of like being more aggressive in this matchup. Because obviously you can have stints where you try to play really reactively, and that gets really rough against like expressive iterations and opposing mURktides and stuff like that. Obviously, in a situation like this where I've just got 3 lands sitting in hand and just this mURktide on board, I don't really have a lot of options. But in other games, it's been working fairly well. Cast Stress down just in case we drew a shadow or a push, but we didn't. So move on to the next game. On to game 2 against the mURktide deck. Trimming on like Street Wraith because they are just like a heavy Lightning Bolt deck. And then I'll trim on Thoughtseize and Drown because I don't want Thoughtseize into top deck war, and then Drown gets a lot worse because of opposing mURktides. Take Iteration is just like best card available. Take Consider. Just trying to cut out their potential draws out of this. Dash Ragavan. It's pretty good, but if I draw a fetch land, I can just get like double Shadow down, dodge Bolt. That's pretty good for me. Or play Shadow of Mortality. So Shadow of Mortality dodges Heat as well, which I think is what I was thinking there, is since Shadow dodges Heat and they had Delirium already, I can just play that out. And then here we'll just give them the Ledger Shredder trigger to get down our double Shadow, hold up Stubborn Denial. Looks like a mURktide. Yeah. mURktide's pretty fine since they have to take themselves off of Delirium to cast it. Then I want to make sure that my mURktide resolves, so I'm absolutely fighting over that that hearse there. Get to Thoughtseize, but this means they're on double chump block duty. We get down our own mURktide that's bigger than theirs, and we just have to hope they don't top deck a Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt or a Heat. Which, of course, you're going to get a little scared when your opponent immediately goes into tapping for an expressive iteration. But game 3 against mURktide, not having an answer to Ragavan is rough. Like, I'll say it as many times as I need to. The 3 biggest threats to this deck are Ragavan on turn 1, especially on the draw, Teferi Time Reveler, and Kroxa. Those 3 cards are like absolute nightmares to deal with. Obviously, Teferi is a little bit better because you have access to just about all of your counter spells on turn 3. But it's still really, really rough. Ragavan, when you're on the draw, all you've got is like the 3 push, 2 dismember. So there's a really good chance your opponent's going to get to hit you once, and you really need a strong follow up, whether that be like multiple shadows or a Shadow of Mortality, something like that. And then Croxa because it's such a good answer about fighting through counter magic. Like you have to spend your counter spells on Croxa or lose a card, in which case they just get to like compile more resources in hand. So we saw petty theft, the unlicensed hearse. We don't really care about the hearse with the current hand, but that doesn't mean I want it just like sitting around. Ragavan's okay-ish. Just get in a big hit because we know our opponent's gonna have to like spend their next turn hearsing. So we can flash in borrower. Or not hearsing, EEing. Now, like if they have the answer to the borrower too, we're kind of out of gas, but it's kind of how it goes sometimes. Opponent had to have a 2-for-1 for our 2 shadows. They happened to, so at least we do have the drown in the lock to kind of fight over the hearse if it comes to that. Want to go ahead and uh, use the drown in the lock just in case they find like a mURktide off the top. I can counterspell the mURktide, but there's a chance that I might not be able to drown it if they like start hearsing themselves. And now the hearse is getting close to one-shot range. So like I really want the ability to kill the hearse if they just play something to crew it. Turok, fantastic draw here. If they don't have the counter spell, we just get to knock everything else out of hand. Go back to a top deck war. Which Turok's one that I wasn't bringing in that aggressively before, but I've started bringing it in more and been pretty pleased with it. All right, so Ledger Shredder comes down, but since Shredder's only a 1/3, it can't crew the hearse. You decide to just go ahead and fire off the removal spell on it. I don't want my opponent top decking like a expressive iteration. And now that I've got counterspell, if they do play a creature that threatens to crew the hearse, I can counter it. But I'm really hoping I can just top deck like a shadow or a shadow of mortality. Either one of those would be absolutely fantastic. Otawara gives me an additional out to unlicensed hearse, so I'm definitely not playing that out. Little monkey. I could try to counter the monkey, or not counter, Otawara the monkey, but they can crew the hearse. I really don't want to waste the Otawara on something that can just be replayed next turn. Rather just use the counterspell now, get that over with. All right, so I'm letting this heat go because it's not actually killing my shadow. They go for the crew. That's fine. I get to Otawara this hearse away. Now they need a follow-up threat, which unfortunately they do find with the mURktide. Can't counter that. But if I do find a way to lose life, at least the mURktide is on chump duty instead of kill my shadow duty. Can't really pass an opportunity to trade mURktide for shadow. So here we go to a top deck war. What you got? All right. Back to more top decking. mURktide's a pretty good follow up. And we get there. So really, really cool to see fighting through like the mURktides, fighting through the unlicensed hearse. We get to go to match 5. So Demolition Field would make me think a mono black Coffers deck. Demolition Field into Field of Ruin means, oh boy, let's hit land drops and pray. Hold up, counterspell this turn. All right, so if you notice, I will pause it real quick here. If you notice our opponent's mana base right now, they cannot make any colored mana. They can tap Demolition Field and Field of Ruin for a colorless, but Cabal Coffers does not add anything right now because they don't have any swamps. So they can't use Field of Ruin or Demolition Field. So we're just going to get down to threat while we can. Hope that they can't answer this mURktide right away. And maybe we get like a couple little cheeky attacks in here. Get down Shadow of Mortality, because if we get to untap, then we can fight over Damnation. Second Shieldred's Edict is a little rough. All right, what you got? Big March. Yeah, it's kind of funny because if our opponent had used one of these Field of Ruin effects on like turn 2, or not turn 2, turn like 4, whatever, to knock out one of our lands, and we could have drowned the first Shieldred's Edict, we would have won that game. Or not the first one, the second Shieldred's Edict. We would have won that game, but we lost because our opponent did not use their Field of Ruin effects. So Urkel's Recall helps fight over like Relic of Progenitus, helps with Snaring Bridge off of Karn, stuff like that. It's not great, but a lot of times you just need like something to do. And here we see Damnation, we see Shieldred. We're just kind of hoping we can tempo ourselves out, or tempo our opponents out with a couple counter spells in a couple turns. We know they have Damnation here, or in this case, the One Ring. So they do get to fog themselves for a turn. We could Urkel's Recall, but they're going to lose life due to the One Ring, and they are on like a clock right now. I say clock in the sense that like One Ring, if they choose to draw, is going to deal them some non-zero amount of damage. So they can choose to just not activate it and use it as a 4-mana fog. All right, Karn Damnation. If opponent has been spending last game and this game like playing around Drowning the Loch, they've done a really good job of it. If it matters, I think this league was live streamed. I don't think my opponent was like stream sniping, but just for the sake of argument, I'm pretty sure this one was live streamed. And yeah, just Cityscape Leveler, take out the mURktide. Believe that's gonna do it. Second card, animate the ring, so we were just dead on board. So it was a pretty okay league. Like, we did go 4-1. We lost our trophy match there to the mono black deck, but at the end of the day, like, Shadow of Mortality looked really solid. Again, seeing multiple mURktides can be really awkward, but the deck's been performing admirably, so expect more content of it going forward. Other than that, hope you all have an awesome rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Catch you back live later. Don't forget to subscribe and check out more Dimir Shadow action.